Hello and welcome to another meeting about the Revised Development Matters 2020 guidance with Julian Grenier.
Hi Sarah, nice to be with you this morning.
Thank you so much for making the time, we do appreciate it. Our last discussion had thousands of viewers, so we know how valuable this sort of to and fro conversation is.
Great.
I'd like to say at the start, this isn't just for our childminder members, this is for our nurseries and our preschools, for everyone in early years who's using the revised EYFS from September and is going to be looking to the Development Matters guidance for guidance.
Yeah, sounds good.
As we're filming this in May 2021, we've got 3.5 months to go until the introduction of the new framework and the new educational programs, and early years providers are starting to think about what they're going to be doing and making decisions for September. So I think it's really important that we try and drill down on a few of the bits that are still concerning our colleagues. If that's good with you today.
Yeah, that sounds all good, Sarah. And thanks for the opportunity for connecting with members. And I guess it's one of the sort of advantages of the state we're in, with everyone getting better at using Zoom and Teams and stuff, that in some ways we can actually share more information with each other than we used to be able to before. So, you know, it's good to have that opportunity.
I wouldn't say I was a dinosaur, but I've certainly learned an awful lot in the last year about technology.
Me too.
We had a really positive response to our last conversation. We've had thousands of viewers who've all really appreciated the information you shared. I think very much we were looking at paperwork last time, and this time I'd like to focus in more on questions that members are asking about observation assessment and planning in the future, if that's good with you.
Yeah, for sure.
Quite a few of our members now are starting to attend local authority training. We've had 2 comments already come back from local authority training. One local authority has told their members, their colleagues, that they have to write a curriculum, and another has told them that Ofsted are going to be doing a deep dive into their curriculum. I wondered if you've got any thoughts on that to start us off.
So sure. So I think that you know, it's made really clear in the revised development matters, because it does follow on from the changes to the EYFS statutory statement, that people shouldn't undertake unnecessary workload. So there is a shift in emphasis, which I'll talk through in a moment. But as I'm talking it through, I think it would be helpful if everyone always has that alarm bell in the back of their mind when they're in a training session, when they're talking to colleagues, when they see something online. Just remember the continuous message in the EYFS and in development matters, which is that before we undertake significant pieces of workload, just stop and think about the value of what you're doing. Is this the best use of your time? Is this what will really help and support your practice? And of course, the children we're working with at the end of the day. So I would always have that flag going on. So when you look at the new development matters, you're seeing a document that has been repurposed from the predecessor document. And that's why on the front page it says curriculum guidance for the early years foundation stage. So why does it say that? It says that to be really clear that the purpose of the document isn't a long list of all the things that every child should be doing at different points in their EYFS journey. That's not the purpose of the document. The purpose of the document is to give us all guidance on the sorts of interactions and experiences, play, enabling environments, adult guided learning, teaching, all of the things that come together that we will be doing so that all of the children we're working with have a really positive experience of EYFS. So it's described as curriculum guidance for that reason. So that then leads us on to, I think, 2 questions. One is, curriculum, that feels like a really new term in the early years, and what does it mean? And the second question is, how do I make sense of this for me? So if I start with the first question, if you roll back and look at when the foundation stage first began in this country, year 2000, it began with curriculum guidance for the foundation stage. And I know this is going back a bit, but that's where we began. And then gradually over the years, curriculum more and more vanished from the official documents, so that in the previous development matters, it doesn't get a mention at all. Now, that's quite an unusual place to be in internationally. If we look at international work and guidance around early years, it's almost always focused on what's an appropriate and effective curriculum for the young children in our society. So part of the intention here was just to, as I said, repurpose the guidance and to look at getting a bit more in line with what best practice internationally suggests. So then you'd think, well, why does best practice internationally suggest that focus on curriculum? And it's because that big picture of what we want children to experience, know, and be able to do then provides us every day with a sense of direction and a sense of guidance. So that's why it's important. So if I then kind of take that down to the actual day-to-day work that all of us are doing, how we respond to this is going to be really different depending on our context. So here in Newham, East London at Sheringham Nursery School, where we've got just over 200 children on roll, we've clearly got to have quite a lot of structures around how we think about children's learning and try to make sure that every child has the best possible experience of their time with us. Whereas in our network, we've got childminders who might have 2 or 3 children in their setting, and what they need is not the same as what we need, because it's much easier for them to think just about those 3 children and hold them all in mind as individuals and think about where their learning is going and what they can best do to support them. So I would never suggest for any of the childminders in our network that they in any way took our work on curriculum and just sort of applied it to their setting. It would be a really bad idea to do that. So what I think is useful to do is this. Begin with this thought. What is the big picture of the experiences you want children to have whilst they're with you, the things you want them to know and be able to do? Talk with parents, talk with colleagues if you're in a childminder network or a local authority training group, or however you're accessing those links with colleagues and trainers. You know, talk to people, have that dialogue, and then I would do something that is pretty straightforwardly written, not really long and complex and written in high-sounding language, something that will really speak to the parents we work with, the settings or the schools that our children will be transferring to when they come to the end of their time with us. It's not going to be a long document. It might be, you know, if I had to give a rule of thumb, we're talking about, you know, 1 or 2 pages, not something really complicated. It's that big picture of what our objectives are and how we see progress for each child within that big picture. I think it would be disproportionate, especially for a childminder or a small PVI setting, to, you know, do more than that, establish that big picture. Why would I do it? It's because I think it's helpful in speaking to the key partners we're working with and saying, look, this is what I'm about. This is what my childminder setting is about. This is what my nursery is all about. And alongside that, I would say to people that it's always important to think about balance. So we know, and again, this is reflected very clearly in development matters, that a lot of children's best learning is driven by their interests and fascinations, and that any plans we have always have to be flexible and they always have to respond to that. That's always been the case in the EYFS, and it remains the case. That balanced view is important to hold on to. So no one is talking about a long and detailed and regimented curriculum framework, if you like, that will constrain our ability to respond to children minute by minute and to maximize the learning based on their interests. That would not be a sensible way to go. So I think those would be the headlines of what I'd say, Sarah.
I remember last time we talked as well about the cohorts of children we have from different communities. Yeah. And how some, I remember our childminder colleague was talking about doing more physical play because children came from maybe places where they didn't go outside every day. So in addition to the top level view that you're thinking of what children need to learn and experience and the child's interests, we need to factor that in as well, don't we, where the child comes from and the experiences, the child's home life. Would you still call that starting points? Do we think that's still valid?
Okay, so I'll say, so I'll answer the first bit of that first, and then starting points will be a great conversation too. So when we are thinking about that big picture, who's at the heart of it? The child. Yeah. Not some notional child, but the actual children in the actual families and communities we're working with. And one of the things I've often said when discussing development matters with people is that what is right, say, for us here is not going to be right for someone else in a completely different context. So even if I went 2 miles further east in London, in general, children's housing is more generously sized, more houses have gardens, there's more outdoor play opportunities for children 2 miles east in Redbridge than there are here in Newham. So it would be entirely wrong for a childminder or a setting in the middle of Redbridge to have the same sort of approach that we have at Sheringham, or Honey, the childminder we spoke with last time, has for her children in Newham. And that's why, one of the reasons why, the decision was made that Development Matters should be shorter than its predecessor version, because it's not for sort of someone working with the DFE to lay down in enormous detail what every child in every part of the country with every different provider should be doing. If we put too much guidance in, we overwhelm people, and then we take away what's really important, which is their professional knowledge and judgment, their understanding of the local families and community, the need for them to do something that's appropriate for the place they're in. So the guidance is shorter, and it's also more plainly written, so it's a faster read. It's a 90-minute read now. And what I would say is find the 90 minutes and read it, and then think, okay, so that's the guidance. Now I'm going to think about the children I'm working with, and what's the most useful guidance in here that's going to help me in my work? Where am I going to put my priorities? So just as I talked about the balance between having a big picture of the curriculum, but being responsive to children minute by minute, I would also say it's important that we have a balance between what's in the guidance and what we know professionally is going to be best for our children. And we should make our choices in exactly that way. And I think the danger is that if we offer people too much guidance, we sort of deprofessionalize the workforce, and then people become very dependent on a lot of detailed guidance, and they lose confidence in all the wonderful skills and knowledge and experience that that they've got. And then just quickly, the final thing I would say about this is, of course, it's also very much dependent on the age and levels of development of the children we're working with. So we know from the EPSI research project, for example, that as children get older in the early years foundation stage. They need more adult guided and playful learning. They need more teaching than they do when they're younger. So the decisions we make will also be very much about the ages and levels of development of the children that we're working with. And people should feel professionally confident to get to grips with the guidance and then make their own informed decisions about how to use the guidance. That's the intention behind the document. So I'm happy to talk about starting points as well. Do you want me just to go straight in there? So,
well, you can do starting points and then you can do progress check it too, if you like, and weave the two together nicely, because that's my next question.
Well, I'm very happy to do that, Sarah, but at risk of it sounding a bit more like a monologue than a conversation, which is never so good, is it? So, starting points. There have been so many questions about starting points from the early adopters, and now that the revised EYFS is getting a bit closer, all the same questions are coming from people who are going to be, of course, falling in line with the new statutory requirements in September. So I've actually just blogged about it, because I felt that otherwise I would just answer the same questions 1,000 times on the Facebook early adopter page and on Twitter. So I put a blog together called Preparing for the Revised Early Years Foundation Stage Questions and Thoughts to answer some of those FAQs, if you like, about it. So when
I'll grab that link and we'll link it below.
That would be absolutely, that would be great. So lots of early adopters said, we're used to new children coming in and we assess their starting points, and then we turn that into data about how many children are well below, how many children are below, how many are where we'd expect them to be, how many are above expectations, and that helps us to track their progress. How are we going to do that? Because you've repurposed development matters so that it's not used in that way, but it's used to guide on the curriculum. So we've lost those age bands that we turned into data that allowed us to do that. And in the Facebook Live event, which I did with Ofsted for the early adopters group, we had quite a lot of discussion about that. And I would say that I think these were the things that people found helpful, and I tried to reflect these in the blog. So go back to first principles, not what we've been doing for the last few years, but the actual reason for assessing children when they first spend time with us, whether, as I said, we're a school or a PVI setting or a childminder. Why do we do it? So we do it because we want to know, where the children are in their development when they begin with us, because we are having to do what we always do in early years and throughout education for that matter, which is make sure that what we're offering is appropriate to the babies and the toddlers and the children who are with us. So that then takes me on to the sort of next thought, which is, so what are the things that I really need to know about a child who starts with me? And, you need to do a bit of adapting here, depending on whether it's a baby or a toddler, a 3 or a 4 or a 5. But very roughly, these are the things I think that I would want to know. First of all, it's about that child's confidence in making a new relationship, moving from parent to childminder or key person in a setting. How confidently are they able to do that? To what extent relative to their age do they also make those new relationships with other children? That would be really important for me to know. Secondly, I'd want to know about their communication. Can they communicate how they're feeling, what they want and need? Can they use communication to join in with play with others, to suggest things to their friends around them where it's necessary? And again, of course, this is relative to age. You know, can they understand and follow instructions if it's important that they stop doing something? So I'd really want to know about their communication. I'd want to know about their physical development, small motor skills, large motor skills, because, you know, we've got lots of stimulating and lovely equipment in our learning environment. So can the child access what I've got, or are they struggling with their physical development and therefore not able to access the equipment that I'm offering them? And also I'd want to know something about the child's self-help skills, for want of a better term. So again, relative to their age, how well they manage things like dressing and undressing, eating and drinking, using the toilet, putting their coat on and off. As I said, relative to the child's age, those would be the sort of things that I'd want to know. So why would I want to know them? Because where we've got a really good settling in process in a setting underpinned by key person approach, or we're working as a childminder to settle children in, where we've got a good approach and we've got a lovely and stimulating environment, and we're giving children warm and loving care and stimulating interactions and conversation, where those things are all happening, you know, all children will have some ups and downs during that settling in phase, but fairly soon they'll be accessing all of the things that we're offering them for their learning and development. They'll be accessing, to use the term I started with, our curriculum, everything we offer them.
That makes
those
sense.
children,
it's more of a conversation
those children are fine. But it may be that some children on some of those areas I just talked about, they've got barriers to accessing what we're offering. They don't have the confidence. So they're so struggling to manage their emotions that it's hard for them to join in and play. Or they don't have the communication they need, or they don't have the level of physical development to access all of the materials I'm offering, or difficulties they've got with some of their self-help skills make it hard for them to join in with other children of their age. So I need to know what those difficulties are, and I need to help the children really quickly. So I need to have conversations with parents. I need to think hard about giving extra support to the child so that as quickly as possible, they're accessing the curriculum I have on offer. So we need to focus our efforts not on generating a lot of data, but on working out which children might need that extra help and then giving it to them really quickly. Because if we hang about, then they start to get frustrated, or they start to feel that they're not great at doing things or whatever else. And then that's an unpleasant, miserable experience for the child. So the information we collect when children start with us, the on-entry assessment, if you like, or the starting points, we do that for a reason. We do it for a reason, to improve the experience of all of the children all of the time. That's the reason for doing it. So me having a bit of paper that says here at Sheringham, 38% of children begin at well below age-related expectations and 40% something else, that at an individual child level doesn't help any child at all. It is unhelpful, in fact, because all the time I've spent on that data, I could have spent developing a partnership with the parent to help the child who's having difficulties. So it's not a good use of our time. But secondly, it's almost certainly really unreliable anyway, and doesn't really help us at all. So it's a huge workload burden for very little positive outcome. So I would just suggest, and again, you can read this in more detail in the blog, think about what it's useful for you to know about each child and focus on that, and focus on the partnership with the parents and the settling in and the key person approach when children begin with you. Don't focus on a massive data generation exercise.
Have that conversation with the parent.
Yeah, have that conversation with the parent about how a child needs really a lot of extra help in some area, and what you're going to be doing, and what the parents' views are, and how the parent and you can develop that collaborative and positive relationship. And listen to the parent. You know, sometimes children struggle with stuff when they're with us that they don't struggle with at home, and we have to think really hard if we're getting something a bit wrong. And if we follow through by listening to parents, again, that can often quite quickly help children when they're just beginning with us. So I think listening to parents is really important, and making sure it's a partnership. And a partnership means that both parties are involved in deciding what to do, and the information from each party is of equal significance. And I think that's an important principle.
We do have a concern, I don't know what the word is, we do have an issue possibly that some parents are harder to reach. They don't want that conversation about their child. They don't make time to have the conversation, perhaps because they're busy with work. They simply, especially for childminders, I note, they want to drop their child and run. And, you know, look after my child, you know, it's not gluten by sort of thing. And it can be very hard to have that deeper conversation with them. Whereas I suppose it's been easy in the past to hand them a list and say, tick what your child can do.
Yeah. So it's a complicated job that we've got. And if it was really straightforward how we supported each child and their family through settling in, and it all flowed really easily, it wouldn't be the job that it is. But we're working with lots of different families with their own stressors and their own strengths. And that's the skill of people in the early years, to build a positive relationship in a different way according to the different needs and strengths and wishes of the families we're working with. And I've always believed that with goodwill, you know, we get there, because the conversation we have with parents is, okay, you know, something like this. I know we seem to be misfiring a bit at the moment, but let's just wind this back. We both really want the best for your child. Let's just focus on what's the best for your child and listen to each other and find a way forward. And I understand that family life can be very stressful first thing in the morning, and that if you don't drop your child really quickly, you're going to have like a whole other catalogue of problems during the day. Let's just see what the best solution we can find to this problem is. May not be perfect from my point of view as an early years provider, and it may be that the parent has to compromise a bit and say to their boss, I'm really sorry, but you know, I am just going to have to be a little bit late for the next few days. But what my childminder or nursery setting is telling me is that if I put this time in now to positive settling in and start to the day, then my child's going to be much more settled, and then I'll be working better because I know my child is settled and happy. So we have to find compromises and understand each other's point of view, and it isn't easy. And that's why I would come back to the principle of focusing on what's best for the child and family, and focus on what's useful to us as practitioners.
That makes good sense. Thank you. Yeah. Then we look at the 2-year progress check, which we have to do, and we have to write. Yeah. Because it's still statutory in the EYFS 2021. And we think in the past, we've had to look at the previous development matters iteration. We've had to put a child in an age range. We've had to say whether they're secure or developing or emerging. And local authorities have, many local authorities have produced forms based on that sort of language. Now, we had a brilliant vlog from Department for Education a few weeks ago, making it clear they weren't expecting that sort of language. So we can move away from it, which is amazing. But what do we do when we don't have any guidance about what to write for our 2 to 3 year olds? Do we just write about them? That's my feeling. Do I just say, I know this child really well because I work with him every day and I'm going to tell you about him? Then what will other agencies and professionals get from that if they're looking for a grade or something to say that child's falling behind or at risk of falling behind?
Yeah. So I think these are really important questions, and also, you know, just to sort of put a dose of honesty into the whole mix, there is a need for more guidance on the 2-year-old progress check, and I think that's a gap at the moment. Now, the reason I looked away from you a minute ago was just because I've got on my second screen what the SEND Code of Practice says about the 2-year development check, which is actually really, really helpful. And in the Code of Practice, they talk about us reviewing progress and providing parents with a short written summary of their child's development, principally focusing on the prime areas. I think that's really helpful guidance in the Code of Practice, and worth checking out, especially if your issue is that you've got a concern about a child's development. Have a look at that page 83 of the Code of Practice. The progress check must identify the child's strengths and any areas where the child's progress is slower than expected. So again, I think that's really helpful. So if I'm writing a 2-year-old progress check, let's just start with the 3 kind of very important basics. You know, number 1, the parent is closely involved in this. Number 2, we're making every effort we can to integrate this with the health visitor check. Number 3, I'm going to say straightforward things about what a child is doing really well and where I've got a concern about their development. Just straightforward in plain English. Jamal really enjoys playing outside and can get engrossed in his play for long periods of time. However, he is not yet understanding some of the things that children and adults are saying to him and needs more help in this area. So we're just saying something in straightforward and plain English. And as a parent, I would much prefer to get that than Jamal is emerging 30 to 50 months in communication and, you know, something else, which is going to sound very technical and isn't really going to make much sense to me. So where we've got some concerns, the Code of Practice says to us to note what they are and to say what we're doing about them. Say what we're doing about them. Now, that shouldn't come as news to the parent. We should have already had that conversation. It would be wrong if a parent sat down to have a look at the 2-year progress check and was surprised by what they saw there, because we'd have been having that dialogue. But once again, you know, I think the guidance is really helpful. So saying what the additional support is and how we're going to offer that, that should be a collaboration with the parents, and the parents' views are really central to that too, because we know that if we're all supporting the child in a consistent way, we've got a much better hope that whatever difficulty they're having in their development is going to be overcome. Lots of children have ups and downs, and their development isn't, as it says in Development Matters, it isn't a straight line. It's more like a spider's web. So we're going to expect these ups and downs. And usually when we all come together and support the child, children get through these difficulties. And that's our kind of key aim. Because like I said to you before, when that doesn't happen, then children start to get frustrated or they lose confidence, and then they really can have a difficulty in their development rather than just a little bit of air turbulence at some point, which is what we expect. And then the code of practice also says, you know, we must say clearly if there's a concern that they have a special educational need or disability. But the paragraph that I think is helpful is when it says that the check must describe the activities and strategies the provider intends to adopt to address any issues or concerns. That's really important. So just giving a sort of list of things that the child is having difficulties with, or just giving a lot of data about their development isn't going to meet the requirement. But saying clearly after dialogue with the parent where the child is having a difficulty with their development and what we're all doing about it, that's a useful thing to do. And then, of course, part of the value of the fact that that is a written and recorded check is that then, you know, at a later point when the child makes the transition on to the next phase of the EYFS, we've got that document, and that's a useful thing to look back on, because we'll either say those strategies worked really well and quite quickly that early difficulty was overcome, or there are still some difficulties and a need for additional and extra support. So the receiving setting knows that lots has been done for the child, but they're still going to need to keep doing that work for that child to thrive with them. What we don't want to happen is that people aren't aware, if you like, of the support and extra help and strategies we've been using for some time, and then there's a gap in support for a child, and that makes the transition really difficult for them.
That's interesting, Julian, because I've never yet had a health visitor look at progress checks, and I've never yet had a school receiving information. And I know I speak for a lot of childminders. There just isn't that partnership.
Yeah.
You know, you do a progress check, you hand it to parents, you say, please show this to your health visitor. It goes in the buggy wheel, under the buggy wheels in the boot. It's never seen again. It stays in the child's file, but the parents are the ones that then take the child's file as the child leaves.
Yeah.
So again, that cohesive working.
Yeah. And it's a bit like what I said about the partnership with parents, that this is a really difficult job that we do in the early years. And you're right that, you know, in some areas, those partnerships are really strong, and in other areas, there's a lot of work to do. So I think the principle is that we look to local authorities to have good arrangements for transition in the early years, with health as partners. That's what we should be doing. And all of the documentation, whether you look in the SEN Code of Practice or anywhere else, is saying that's what should be happening. And you're absolutely right. Practice is varied around the country. And I think if people are struggling where they are, then this is a really good question or point to raise when you've got training about the revised EYFS with your local authority, or when you have that moment, is just to say, I think transition is a really important part of early years. And, you know, to quote what has often been said, I don't want to see it as an event. I want to see it as a process. Mm-hmm. And I want to see lots of people coming around that child to make the process as positive as it can be, because they're the person in the middle of it who will suffer if we don't do a good job. And we've got to focus on making transition as good as we can. So, you know, I've been really interested to look at what they're doing in Hertfordshire, for example, where they've got a really good program looking at transition, and they're using that UNICEF model when they think about school readiness, which is children ready for school, schools ready for children, parents in the community ready to support the child's move into school. So they're looking at all three dimensions in a really helpful way. They've got really good protocols around transition. So you don't have to reinvent the wheel if you're a local authority that isn't at that place. You just have to have a look at what Hertfordshire are doing, and there's a lot a huge amount of value there and a lot to build on. You know, here in Newham, we've got a common format so that every child that moves from one setting to the next, the transition report and the guidance about the process is the same. And we as a children's centre really support childminders to have those connections with schools and settings, and stress the key importance that we all have professional dialogue about the child and what's best for them, and don't end up in that place that is rather depressing, that can sometimes happen, that you described, where people feel that they put a lot of work into something but no one else joins in. So, you know, there is a lot of work to do around transition around the country. You know, we've got we've got this common protocol, but we've still got a lot of work to do here. We haven't got there yet. But those are the points that I would focus people on.
Thank you, that's really helpful. I have a specific question from a group of childminders who've approached me now. They use the in the moment planning, which is trademarked, approach to their work. And they have a concern about how that will link in with the new curriculum guidance, because they're very much based on following developing children's interests.
Yeah. So I would take that back to that discussion about balance. So the real value of that process is the way that it encouraged all of us to try and be very present minute by minute with the children that we're with, and notice what they're doing, join in with their play, or stand back and gently encourage them, for example. Rather than constantly have things to tick off or clipboards at hand or whatever else it might be. So there was huge value in that focus, for sure, but we have to take a balanced view. So that approach is really powerful and important, but it needs to be balanced with us having that bigger picture of what it is that we want children to experience and be able to do during their time with us. And when we get the balance right, then we're offering the very best to all of our children. And again, I've often given maths as an example of where we would need to think carefully about that balanced approach, which is that the research into early maths tells us that a lot of children's play is mathematical, and it's important for us minute by minute to notice that, to join in and extend it and talk to the children about their mathematical ideas, or think carefully about what they've been doing one day and then prepare maybe a more challenging set of equipment for the children to use the next day. So that's all really valuable, for sure. But we also need to understand how children learn to count. They need a lot of different skills, and they need to build those concepts securely and carefully over time. Now, if you're in a big setting with lots of children, it is not realistic to think that you can help every child individually build all of those concepts over time by responding minute by minute to their play. You're just not going to be able to do that. And that balanced approach is what I'm advocating. I don't think at any stage of education, including early years, we can have a situation where learning is 100% initiated by the child. And the EPSI project, which is the biggest research report we've got into early years in England, makes exactly the same point about that balance between children playing freely and exploring freely and driving learning through their own interests. And that's really important. But that playful adult guided learning, that clear sense practitioners have got of what it is we want children to experience and know and be able to do, that's important too. And we need to keep that balanced approach.
It's a pity in a way EYFS have removed the word balanced, isn't it, from the child initiated and adult guided and adult led play. It was in 2017 because it makes so much sense to keep the balance.
Yeah, I think
another question that our members are asking. Sorry, go on.
No, it's fine, Sarah. Let's go on to the next question.
Another question that our members were asking, I don't know where they picked this up from, maybe our last conversation or maybe your blogs. You talk a lot about the core books you use in your nursery, and it sparked a lot of curiosity and interest, really. And I just wondered if you could tell us a little bit more about that, please. Yeah,
so for sure. And if and when I get some time, I definitely want to share this in a blog. So I suppose in a nutshell, the core book approach really starts with Centre for Literacy and Primary Education in London, who suggested that one way of thinking about children's engagement and love of early reading would be to choose a small collection of high quality books, which we would consider to be our core books. And those core books are set out by age for the children. And when we're making that choice about our core books, we'd be thinking about the quality of the book, the pictures and the language, how engaging the children will find it, that the messages in those books must be the right ones about what boys and girls can do, about what people with disabilities and special needs can do, must be clearly both diverse in their representation, but also anti-racist in their approach. And again, there's a lot of guidance online about this. For example, Foundation Stage Forum have just put a video out about choosing books when we're thinking about diversity and positive messages, which is a really helpful resource. So if you think about that as the principle, why does that link into sort of thinking about curriculum in the early years? So when we look at our core books for our 2-year-olds or for our 3- and 4-year-olds, the curve in those core books is from texts which are very simple for the children through to texts which have more challenging vocabulary and more challenging language structures. Over 90% of our children are learning English as an additional language. So we might start, for example, with a book like Where's Spot, because there isn't a lot of English in that book. You can enjoy it even if you don't have much English. It's a very interactive book, and it's a really good starting point. Down the line, you might be looking at a book like We're Going on a Bear Hunt, where there are those wonderful repeated refrains which can help children learning English as an additional language to get sort of footholds into whole phrases in English in an enjoyable way. Further down the line, you might be looking at a book with much more complicated language structures like, say, Lima's Red Hot Chili Pepper. So that's what the curve looks like. And because we've got a lot of turnover of children here, it's not simple, if you like, because you've always got new children coming in who need those simpler texts. So you're always doing what we always do in the early years, which is you've got an overall picture of what you're trying to do, but you're then adapting it because you're thinking about the individual children. So when we have a core book here, that's our core book for 3 weeks. So for 3 weeks, we will be repeatedly reading that book with the children, We'll be offering them lots of fun play activities and experiences that are linked to that book, so that they really get very familiar with the text. But also, say if we're going on a bear hunt, we really want the children to know what we mean by long wavy grass, or by splashing in a puddle, or the thick oozy mud. They've got to have the experiences to sort of deepen their understanding of the text, and we can keep using that vocabulary when we're having those play experiences with the children. We use a website called lovemybooks.co.uk, who have videos and other activities that go with all of the core books. So we send those home to parents using WhatsApp. So that means, for example, if you're a parent who's not that confident about reading the book to your child, there'll be a video. So Michael Rosen reading We're Going on a Bear Hunt, for example. And it gives parents nice ideas of things to do at home with their children that are linked to the book. So that by the end of the year, the children who've been with us all year will have that really deep familiarity with a small set of what we call core books. They will love those books. They'll know them inside out. They'll be able to pick them up and enjoy them by remembering what the words are, by remembering the sequence. We have a lot of focus on what we call shared reading or dialogic reading, which is when we sit down with the child and don't just read the book to them with the child as audience, if you like, but encourage children to have conversations. You know, have you ever splashed in a puddle? How would you feel if you got into the cave and then saw the bear? So we use the book, exactly. So we use the book as a focus for conversation, and that's really powerful for the children. And it's all on a progress model. So as the year goes on, the vocabulary is more challenging, the language structures are more challenging, the concepts in the book are more complex, so that with all of our children accessing that core book program, we know that they are making progress in their early reading. And that's what I would mean by a curriculum that's on a progress model.
That's brilliant. And obviously that goes alongside the inspection handbook, which says we have to promote a love of reading at home, because we are sharing the Love My Books link. I'll get all these links from you if that's okay, and we'll put them below, because there's some,
yeah, of course,
gold dust here.
And yeah, we found it's a really nice way of promoting parent involvement with the core book program, is to use the Love My Books website. It's a really useful website, but it also very usefully groups the books into suggested age bands, which is helpful for us, I think. But it also groups books by theme, if you like. So if you've got a child who's really fascinated in dinosaurs or something, you can use Love My Books in that way as well. That's
very useful, because we all know our dinosaur children and our spinner children who are spinning. Julian, thank you so much for making this time to talk to us today. It's really appreciated. As I said at the start, I know our first video got a lot, has had thousands of views, and I'm sure this one will too.
Great. It's been my pleasure, Sarah. Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you.
Okay, take care.